Good afternoon and welcome to the SECAF webinar on reopening the workplace, considerations for leaders in minimizing risk. I'm Mitch Ross, the CEO of Acquisition and Management LLC, a management consulting firm to the public sector. And I'm hosting here today as a member of the board of directors of SECAF. SECAF, as the name states on the screen, is the Small and Emerging Contractor Advisory Forum. It's a nonprofit association dedicated to the very small firms that are in the government contractor space and those that are really emerging. So some from owner-operated firms all the way up to 25 to sometimes $50 million in revenue. The purpose of SECAF, as the motto that we have implies, our motto being connect, educate, and champion, is to enable small and emerging firms to meet with people from the government contracting community, both inside industry and also especially from the government. A series of programs are put on regularly. And of course, even in this COVID-19 pandemic environment, we're continuing to pursue those interactions with government and industry. Today, we have the opportunity to have a presentation on an area that is very relevant to what our small businesses are facing. Helios HR is one of the firms that has been affiliated with SECAF for a very long time. The chief executive of Helios, Kathy Alvarado, has long been a champion of the small business community, has served on the board of directors of SECAF for a very long time, and has been someone that I personally have worked with for more than a decade. And Helios is one of the preeminent firms in the HR space, and we're really fortunate today that Kathy has agreed to allow some of the people from her very talented team to come and talk to us today. Before I introduce the speakers, just a couple of tips about the Zoom software that we're using today. All the participants are muted. You can ask a question at any time. At the bottom of your screen, if you highlight it, you will be able to move your cursor to the Q&A icon. If you click on that icon, you'll be able to type a question into the dialog box, and that will enable our moderator to go ahead and submit that question to our speakers, and we will answer questions at the very end. We'll provide a link to the recorded portion of this webinar to all attendees, so you will be able to see the presentation. So today we're fortunate from Helios to have Kim Moshlak and Cassie Gare. Kim is a principal consultant and Cassie is a senior consultant. Both of them have been working in the human resources discipline for a very long time, have worked with a lot of clients. I personally have worked with them and know them to be just top drawer people that cover the waterfront in a HR area. We also have a third speaker that's joining us today, Kara Ariel. Kara is a partner with Holland & Knight and works out of the Tyson's office of Holland & Knight. And she has been a partner to Helios and engaged on many of the interactions that Helios has had with its client base. So we've got a very good program for you here today. And I'll join you again at the end and tell you again about some of the other things that SECAF is doing. So thanks very much for joining us today, and we will now begin.
Thank you, Mitch. Again, my name is Cassie. I'll be heading up the first part of the presentation. And so just as a, as an opening statement here. So as the COVID-19 pandemic has, rapidly disrupted our work environments, I think the initial focus for most organizations was really just emphasizing and supporting the health and the safety of the employees. And now we're learning how to, or if you haven't learned or still learning, really learning how to virtualize the work and the workforce. So leaders now are focused on reopening and restoring the workplace in an effective, efficient, but a safe manner. And we're still figuring out that there's still a lot of unknowns. And so our goal today is to bring awareness and, around considerations and questions that you should be asking yourself around the type of work that needs to be done at your workplace, your workforce, and how those things may shape your reopening decisions. So for organizations contemplating or planning the reopening of their offices, any workplace related decisions you have made or are making now and over the next several months is really going to shape your culture, your leadership, and employer brand for the next several years. Because of these lasting impacts, Helios has created a 5-step process to help organizations make the right decisions when determining when it's time to reopen the workplace and really some of the things that go into that planning. Next slide. So here's just a high-level overview of the iterative 5-step process that Helios has put together. And today, me and my colleague Kim will be giving you an overview of each step. And of course, we have Kara Ariel from Holland and Knight, who is going to support us with any questions and answers, or sorry, questions you might have. So she's going to help provide support for the answers. Next slide. So step 1 is establishing a COVID-19 task force. And at this point, most of us are already well past step 1. And if you haven't already done so, establishing that task force is going to be a very important step. In addition to supporting employees during this historic time, this task force should be formed with a mission to ensure that a thorough and intentional action plan is developed that supports the business from an employee safety, employee experience, operational, and business risk perspective. And at a minimum, your task force should include members of your senior leadership, representatives from HR, IT, communications, office administration, and of course, facility managers. Step 2, next slide. Step 2 is assessing and evaluating your organization's return to work decisions. So we're going to kind of walk through some of the impact and business risks. We'll certainly talk about employee concerns and some safety practices and benefits that your organization could receive from continued work from home practices. Next slide. One of the things that I really want to stress today is that organizations, should not be in a rush to reopen the workplace. There are a number of people and businesses who are really eager to get back to the workplace, which is understandable. And organizations need to realize that even if you can legally reopen your workplace, the risk for additional legal exposure still exists, as well as a lot of other potential issues. Next slide. So on this slide, we've put together a few considerations that you should be thinking of prior to reopening your workplace. Helios also has a guide that we're going to be sending out after this webinar that's going to have some additional considerations. We also have a lot of content on our website as well. So one of the first things you should be asking is, what's happening or what is not happening in our business now that would require us to fully reopen the workplace. So Helios really encourages leaders to think holistically about the choices they must make relative to their business. Setting a date for reopening, a state economy and requiring a physical presence in your office are really two separate decisions. And we're also encouraging organizations that, you should be using data and not dates. So don't let a date be driving your decision, but more so the data. Again, don't be in a hurry. Determine which functions, the specific type of work, and what roles need to return to the workplace to be effective. And so once you get past that, there's other considerations that can your employees even return to the workplace. So think of those employees who have childcare or elder care responsibilities, because these types of services are not yet readily available to the masses. Kim's going to address the school situation in more detail in her portion of the presentation, but this is certainly going to be an issue for a lot of our employees. And is your organization ready to address these issues? Have you thought about how you're going to, respond to employees who are having these challenges? And so not so long ago, Virginia instituted a face mask requirement. And as of last night, Governor Northam released safety mandates for Virginia employers. These safety mandates require all employers to enforce social distancing where they can, and face coverings for employees in customer-facing positions. So these are very new regulations. I know there's more information to come about, but in addition to these safety standards, Virginia is now going to require that all employees be notified within 24 hours if a coworker tests positive for the virus. And any employees who are known or suspected to be positive for COVID-19 cannot return to work for 10 days or until they receive 2 consecutive negative tests. And so how are you as the employer going to implement these requirements into your workplace if you have a business in Virginia? So that's just one example. And initially, law enforcement wasn't enforcing the mask rules, so it may not have been a huge legal exposure for organizations in Virginia in that sense, but it can become a management issue for your organization. Are your managers prepared to deal with these types of things if employees come to them with these challenges or issues? And I think, over the past month or so, or a couple of months, we've seen that the level of enforcement seems to be getting just a bit stricter. So there may be more legal exposure to organizations than originally anticipated with these new safety mandates, particularly in the Virginia area. So with that being said, is your leadership from the top down prepared and trained to lead with empathy and address concerns as they arise, cascading down a people-first way of working throughout the organization? And then morale. So how is reopening the workplace going to impact your employee morale, both in the short and long run? The emotional well-being of our workers has become a greater and much more visible priority than ever before, and rightfully so. There's a lot of safety concerns, not only from a health perspective, but also from a mental perspective. This is all very challenging times for our employees. And if organizations are forcing employees or making employees feel that they must return to the workplace, more so ruling with a fist than an open hand, this can have a devastating impact to an employee's morale. And if employees don't feel safe, they're not going to be productive. If employees aren't productive, that ultimately results in lost productivity, which results in lost dollars for your organization. And for those organizations, who aren't doing so well on Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and all of the other social media platforms, now is the time to really change the mind of their employees to start to build a better employer brand. There's a quote that Mark Cuban made not so long ago, and he states that how you treat your employees today will have more impact on your brand in the future than any amount of advertising and any amount of anything you literally could do. How companies respond now will define their brand for decades. So that's kind of the point that we try to drive home just a couple of slides ago, but it's truly important. The decisions that you make now for your organization, they will have lasting impacts. And then how do you know how do your employees feel about returning to the office? Do your leaders know how the employees feel? And if so, how do they know? So one of the things that your task force should gather is feedback. Some of the things that we've been doing at Helios is helping our clients facilitate discussions with their employees. And we've been creating surveys to gauge and measure how the employees feel. Even internally, these are actions that Helios leadership has taken to see how we feel as consultants and to gauge our comfort level. And obviously, there's a lot of ways that you can collect this type of data, and that's really going to be based on your culture, your operating style. And by collecting this type of data, It will help inform the future decisions and actions that the task force and ultimately your organization will need to take. And so consider why your business may benefit from continued work from home practices. Aside from the obvious, no commuting, I personally am loving that right now. Decreased expenses, and for some, fewer distractions, but I know that goes both ways. There's obviously office distractions, and there are a lot of at-home distractions as well. But there are other benefits to remote work that can help bolster a business. So for example, recruitment. If your business is one of those that can work remotely, I know a lot of businesses are still learning. Some of us have figured out that, hey, remote work is not so bad. If you can continue remote work, you can open up your talent pool to the entire nation pretty much. So previously, we were in a tight labor market. I would say this has probably changed now with the loss of work for a lot of Americans. But if you can support remote work, you are no longer obligated to recruit in a specific demographic area. Now your recruitment pool has opened up. This could be good for businesses, particularly those businesses that are in, I would, classify as highly compensated areas, such as Washington, D.C., or if you think about companies in California, such as San Francisco or Southern California. You're paying a lot of money for the labor to work there. But now if you can attract labor that is not in those areas, you could potentially get reduced labor rates for those workers. Real estate's another one. So a lot of our clients are actually working with their leasing agents to see about reducing office space. So this newly forced, remote work is really making organizations think about the amount of office space that they need. And I think many organizations are now realizing that they don't need as much office space as they have. So it's really spurring them to kind of, one, think holistically about their office and what they actually need out of an office. And then, working with their real estate agents to make sure that they hopefully can make some changes to gauge what they really need going forward. And then still on the office side, so if you're not in the office, you're not necessarily, you don't have to buy office supplies anymore. I know some offices were providing free snacks and things like that. So those are being reduced, which would cut some of the costs. And ultimately, that would go back to the business. And lastly, compiling a list of pros and cons for reopening your workplace based on what you know today. And what we know today is always ever changing, so your list of pros and cons will probably always change. I have written down a couple of cons and a couple of pros. I'm sure that there are plenty more than what I will mention, but cons, safety, so that's always a concern. So how is your business going to ensure the safety of your employees? And can you ensure that even if you're telling employees that it's safe, is it really? What would you do if an employee came in and had COVID? How are you going to react to that? So that's going to be one of the cons. And then how are you going to, address employee issues such as people not wanting to come back to the office? And here I think of two different things. So there's not wanting to come back just because you don't feel like it, but there's also not wanting to come back because you can't come back either due to childcare, schooling now, which is going to be an issue, or maybe because of health concerns. So this is, obviously going to be very taxing on the manager and the HR department who are going to have to figure out how to deal with all of these concerns. And then another con is, can you get your office to where it needs to be for social distancing? This can be very expensive to some organizations, especially those smaller organizations who may be impacted by COVID and are ready to get back to work, but they probably can't because they can't afford to get the office to where it needs to be. Some of the pros of going back to, or staying at home are, you're helping your employees maintain a work-life balance. Again, it's been pretty challenging, I think, for at least everyone that I know. And so helping them maintain that, that balance could be a driver for their morale, and it could make them feel more comfortable in the job and what they're doing today. I put down a pro, less distractions with office drive-bys. And again, I know that goes both ways because we also have home distractions. And then so for both pros and cons, I think that many organizations are realizing that productivity is still happening. Their workers are being productive. So that's great. But on the Helios side, we're also hearing that that productivity could be driven because of the fear of people losing their jobs. They could be anxious and they could be afraid to ask for help. So while the productivity is great, but keeping your employees' morale and well-being top of mind is also still a concern. So put that as a pro and con. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Kim, who is going to walk you through steps 3 through 5.
Thanks, Cassie. So, absolutely. I mean, as we're thinking about moving forward through this pandemic, we certainly need to be thinking about a lot of things. And the most important thing that we need to do is step 3. What we're talking about here is to stay apprised of what's going on. So not only the status of what's happening with the pandemic, also knowing and understanding what regulations and guidelines are being issued that might help us make some decisions as we're moving forward. So, there's so much information floating around. I'm sure you're all inundated. And speaking with one of my clients this week, they said it's almost become a hobby in the evening of kind of trying to see what you can find to add to your knowledge. And it's absolutely true. There are ways that you can do that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But, really being intentional about making sure that you're getting factual data on which you can base business decisions is really important. So we offer you these 5, and actually I'll offer you a couple more, but these 5 certainly organizations or areas are ones in which you'll be able to get current up-to-date information to help you make business decisions. So certainly until this week, we would say the CDC would be your first and foremost place to start and look for information regarding updated statistics and guidelines. As you may be aware, the White House has asked states to report directly now to a clearinghouse that's been established. Although that's happened, we still believe that the CDC will continue to be up to date and will continue to be the best place of information regarding guidelines, information with statistics around how the virus is moving through the US, and of course, as well as safety. And of course, OSHA would also be a great site for you with regards to safety. And the White House has regular briefings, as you're probably aware, that are going on regularly, and they provide a great amount of information. Whitehouse.org, the website there, there's a tremendous number of resources available there as well. And just today, I looked this morning, and just today, there are guidelines for reopening America, as well as an entire section on the pandemic. So you can get the White House's perspective there. And then, of course, there's state and local regulations coming out almost daily that advise us how to move forward in our businesses. So as Cassie mentioned, just yesterday, Virginia approved the first safety-based protocol for the United States. And so if you're going to be reopening your business, there are safety guidelines. And while they haven't given specific detail in there, and maybe Kara has more updated information for us than that, and we'll ask her about that in a moment. And in fact, Kara, have they given any more detail than what came out last night?
I'm not aware that that's the case, but to be clear, I haven't checked yet today. So unless it came out this morning, there's been no further detail. And my understanding is that the standards are first going to be published in a Richmond-based newspaper and then posted on the Department of Labor and Industry website. So that's a good place for Virginia employers to keep an eye out.
Terrific, thank you. And if you have Maryland-based businesses, I'm not sure if you were aware yesterday, Maryland's governor discussed an unemployment fraud scheme that's been going on. So all those kinds of things, while they may not directly impact your business, they could potentially impact decisions that you make around how you're moving forward. So it's just good to stay certainly current with everything that's going on in the DMV area. So those state and local regulations will certainly be helpful. And then the American Medical Association has a really robust section about not only educating people on the virus, but also a little bit more about statistics and NIH as well, and Johns Hopkins. And so there are lots of places that you can go to get current data. Some of the comments that we're receiving from clients is that the employees don't feel like they understand enough or know enough. And so these would be great places to direct people if they want to understand more about the virus. Now, Cassie mentioned the school situation just yesterday. Yesterday was a very busy day in legislation. So just yesterday, Prince William County, Virginia, made the decision that they are going to start the school system completely virtual. And so most of the rest of the counties are still moving forward with the concept that they will be some virtual, some in person. And we'll see if that changes. But as of yesterday, Prince William County will start the school system completely virtually. So that's a really interesting perspective for those of you who have employees that live in that area, certainly with younger school age children, because it will create challenges again, as we have. That challenge is going to continue for them about where they're going to be, where their focus is going to be. So, you know, we've certainly had a lot of discussions with our clients and internally as well about how to help our employees stay focused on what's really important about the work, and also how to manage what's happening in their home life. So that work-life balance piece has been a focus. And so now that we know, and as we're getting closer to the school year, we'll know more, that we're going to need to consider that as well as we continue to open our businesses back up. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. And so the CDC continues to recommend these 3 questions when we're talking about opening or opening more of your business back up. And so they are you in a community that no longer requires significant mitigation? Now, as of yesterday, 32 states continue to be on the rise with numbers. So in this area, we continue to be on the rise with numbers. Actually, Maryland's dropping a bit. Virginia went up yesterday. They had a higher number of cases yesterday, but that tends to be down in the Hampton Roads area. So we need to really look at the local area to determine whether or not we're seeing a rise in cases and whether or not we feel like that could impact the businesses open back up. Will you be able to limit non-essential employees to those from local geographical areas? In other words, are you able to ensure that folks who are coming into the office space are going to be here from the local area and are not coming from maybe a potential hotspot into your space? Working with a client a couple of weeks ago, and they had a team of interns that they wanted to bring in from a school in Chicago. And so the question was, do we expose our employees to people from a different part of the country at this point, or do we put that program on hold and figure out how to do it virtual or figure out how to do that virtually? And then what protective measures do we have in place for employees who are at higher risk? And so how do we determine whether or not the employees that we have on staff that may be in one of the higher risk categories, if we can actually bring back our team and still keep those folks safe? Next slide, please. And so in April, OSHA issued the first of what has now been developed several times, but an enforcement memo that essentially says that compliance and health and safety officers should make sure that employers are doing the best job they can, a good faith effort to comply with applicable OSHA standards, and make sure that whenever possible, they're not exposing their employees to a hazardous work environment. And so OSHA defines a good faith compliance as employers thoroughly exploring all the options that they can to make sure that they're complying with the standards that are in place, that they're using virtual training or remote communication strategies, and any other alternative protections implemented to provide employees a safe and healthy work environment from which to work. And that if an employer needs to, they would reschedule any kind of an annual activity so that they have the least amount of risk for their employees. Next slide, please. So step 4 of our process, we are recommending that you plan and prepare for your business impact. So things to consider here, in this area include making sure that your employee safety is top of mind, and you'll probably not, I mean, we just can't say it often enough. And it really has to be an employee-centric decision. So as much as we want to make decisions about how to keep a business as profitable as we possibly can, we really need to consider what it's going to do to our employees. And we've mentioned that several times through, but really staying focused on the employees' impact and ensuring that the employees not only are safe in the work environment, but that they feel safe coming to the work environment. I have seen in one organization that I have worked with, they actually have, it's a manufacturing organization. And what they did was they brought in nurses, registered nurses who are there at each shift change to ensure that everyone who's coming in passes a medical screening every single day. And so that helps the employees feel confident that the environment is trying its level best, that the company, the organization is trying its level best to make sure that the environment is safe. And so that certainly wouldn't be for every organization, wouldn't necessarily need to do that, but just an idea to help. Certainly in a manufacturing organization, there's lots of people tend to get a little bit closer together, and there's a lot more impact. So making sure that there are medical screenings going on and temperatures being taken has really been helpful with that organization to keep their attendance up and to keep their employees safe. Deciding who needs to return to work. So are there employees who can continue to, if they have been, work remotely and still not have create an impact to the business that's negative? Can we keep the productivity up? And if so, who are those folks? And not necessarily the people, although sometimes it can be the characteristics of the people, but essentially we're looking here really more at the roles and the positions. It's very difficult for someone who's customer facing every day. So for instance, our people who work in retail, it's very difficult. They obviously can't work from home. Their work is at the office. So while that's not really appropriate here to us, just as an example, as you're looking at your employee base, are there people who could continue to work remotely in the roles that they're in? And then planning for how we're going to navigate employee challenges. So each individual employee may have their own individual challenges that they need to figure out how to overcome before they can come back to work. So we've already talked about school, but there are other things that could be taken into consideration, such as employees needing to stay home because they have a family member who is high risk, or certainly childcare is going to continue to be an issue. So or maybe they themselves may be high risk. So each individual will have their own set of challenges. And so as we look at bringing people back to work, it's not going to be kind of a flip the switch and everybody comes back in. We're going to need to look at people in their own individual situations and bring them back in such a way that it makes sense for them. And then lastly, of course, limiting business risk, always going to be a focus for us to be able to determine whether or not bringing people back in is the right decision and what damage it could cause to our business. In the event someone should be should come down with the virus or should potentially expose others to the virus. And we're talking about that from an employee perspective. Certainly, we want to make sure that we're not going to damage morale if we have people come into work and someone brings, someone comes in and exposes folks to the virus. That's certainly going to impact our morale and productivity. It's also going to have brand image that we need to consider, and we need to weigh that heavily to determine whether or not we feel like that bringing folks back to the office is going to make sense compared to what the possibilities could be on the other side. And then if you, next slide, please. So as we've talked about kind of our exposure risks in the workplace, what else could we be exposing our employees to? Do we have vendors that come in regularly that could be going from customer site to customer site and possibly exposing our employees? And if so, how do we manage that so that we have as much contactless contact as we possibly can? Does our workplace configuration align with our plans to reopen? So if we're in these large open workspaces, do we need to figure out how to block off the sections so that each person has a more separate or private area with which to work, in which to work, so that they are able to remain safe? And how are we going to address the concern from the employees who cannot and don't want to come back to the workplace? Maybe they are concerned for reasons that they don't even want to share. Maybe they have different reasons that they choose not to come back to work. So what kinds of processes can we put in place to talk with our employees and really figure out what's going to be best for them at that moment when it's time for us to bring employees back to the workplace? Next slide, please. And so our step 5, what I like to call our wash, rinse, and repeat. You know, recapping here, we want to make sure that we're assessing and evaluate our return to work decisions, that we're staying apprised of the government regulations and guidelines, that we're planning properly, and that we're constantly evolving by using these steps over and over again. So once our committee is in place and we have those processes, steps 2 through 5 are, once our committee is in place and we have our decisions on how we're going to move forward, steps 2 through 5 are going to help inform us as to the best way to move forward with those decisions. Okay, next slide, please. So those are essentially the 5 steps of the process, and what we'd like to do now is open for questions. Julia, if you'd like to open that piece up. I tell you what, Julia, I think we have a poll actually. If we could bring up the poll, we're kind of curious to know a couple of things just from our perspective. At what stage of reopening is your organization currently? So where are you right now with your reopening? Just give you a minute or 2 to answer that. So we got here. So yeah, about half completely closed. Yeah, yep. And then we've got some people coming in every day and some shift working. I know there's been some of our clients have employees coming in 1 week they work, 1 week they don't. Some have them coming in 1 or 2 days a week. And we've got one organization that's fully back open and working. Okay, thank you. And I think we had a second poll too, another question we wanted to find out just for as we continue to grow our knowledge of what's going on in the area. What's your biggest challenge right now with opening the workplace? Yeah. Employee wellness and safety, certainly. And logistically, it certainly makes sense. So one of the questions we have in the poll is, one of our questions that we have to answer is whether or not workers, workers who are required to work because they're considered essential and their position doesn't allow for them to telework or work from home. So, that does create a lot of struggle in terms of how you make decisions and manage that. And I think a lot of it depends upon the situation that you're in. I mean, because we're talking here with folks who are working in the contracting field, it's really going to depend on what the customer is asking. And so if the customer is asking for employees to come in, we've got to figure out how to get employees in. And so, again, I know a lot of the contractors are working week on, week off, or some days on a week and some days off a week, and, are not permitted to, certainly because of the type of work, can't do that work from home. They need to be in a SCIF to do that. So it would be a little helpful if you could ask a little bit more specifically what you're asking here. But I think what we're talking about is just how do we manage to meet the client's expectation and still keep our employees safe. And so one of the things, I think the Virginia's regulation that just came out is going to help with that a lot in terms of managing the safety piece.
Yeah. There's a pretty good question that maybe Kara could help answer. So is it legal to have employees sign a waiver of liability?
This is a really good question, and I've been getting it from a lot of clients. The problem with waivers in the employment context is that you really can't waive your rights to pursue certain claims or to, for example, file a complaint with OSHA or to file a workers' compensation claim. And so we are really strongly recommending against trying to have your employees sign any kind of waiver or any kind of like assumption of risk or anything like that. That said, what I have been recommending for our clients and recommend for all employers is that you do have your employees sign a written acknowledgement of your safety procedures and protocols. And as part of that written acknowledgement, you can address a few points. Number one, that the employee is aware of your policies and agrees to abide by them. Number two, that your employee understands that despite the implementation of your safety policies, there is no way that any employer can completely mitigate the risk of COVID-19 transmission or exposure. Number three, that the employee agrees that if their personal circumstances change for any reason and they feel it's not safe for them to come to the workplace, they will notify the employer of that. And then number four, if the employee is in the workplace and observes any violation or disregard of any safety rules that have been established, they will notify the employer. So with those four pieces and an acknowledgement, I think you're really doing the most you can to be protective. And, again, I would say, as with so many things, this is also an area that's evolving, right? And so we may see at the state level some additional regulations or guidance on this as we move forward, but nothing at this time.
Thanks, Kara. Okay, Kim, I'll pose a question to you. So, here we have one from the audience. Okay, so how do we ensure we are doing all we can to protect our folks and make sure that they feel that we are when they are required to be in the office in order to meet employment needs? Obviously, we track safety guidelines, but what else should be considered? So, Kim, I think this might be in the safety area, but I think some of the other things that you definitely should consider is, safety training. So it's not enough to just do or say that we're safe, we're doing all I can, but maybe they need training, whether it's training on how to wear a mask or training on how to wash your hands properly. Maybe it's reminders. Kim, what else would you recommend?
Yeah, I think those are great topics. I do think, there's probably a lot to be said for that. And while people may think that that's kind of controlling or managing, I think it's fair for employers to say, these are the guidelines under which we expect you to work. And certainly, if you have, if you're moving into someone else's work environment, like those of us on this call are doing, you're going into another work environment. So making sure that you are clear with what the expectation is and that you can help to help them understand exactly what you're visualizing by a quick training session. Even just a video would work, or kind of just to record someone doing a video. That would be a quick and easy way to do it, and then just have people confirm that they have watched that and that they understand, along with the document that Kara was talking about. I think sound really good. Kara, what else would you add to that?
Sorry, I was on mute and started talking. No, I think that's right. I agree with your recommendations, and I think that it's really, kind of a key principle is just being open to implementing new things, communicating new guidance and requirements, and making sure that all of your communications and all the steps you do take are framed in the context of being subject to quick change depending on changing circumstances.
Thanks. So while we're on the topic of safety, so I know temperature checks are a common thing that I hear, and it might be good to talk about how businesses are handling temperature checks, and if there's any requirements around conducting them.
So I will share with you that working with one client, they had found a kiosk where an employee would come in during the day and walk up to the kiosk, and the kiosk would take their temperature and record it. Because Kara, if we can ask you to talk about recording temperatures and that data in a moment, that'd be great.
Sure.
My only concern with that is that this particular kiosk would flash a red or a green, and I'm concerned about the people that may be standing in line behind and what their feeling might be about knowing that the person in front of you that you were standing 6 feet away from just tested, just has a high temperature. So I would certainly recommend that if you're doing any sort of temperature checking, that be done in such a way that it's separate from other employees. And Kara, regarding the requirements, could you share with us what those are around when you're doing that testing, what you need to do with the data?
Sure. I agree with your point 100%, Cam, on making sure that the method you're using for anything like that doesn't unintentionally, convey the information to other individuals. It's really something we want to approach like we do any medical documentation that we receive from employees, right? You want to maintain the confidentiality of those records. You're collecting them only for legitimate business reasons, and communicating them to others only on a need-to-know basis. And I think that, one of the things about the new Virginia law that I know, or Virginia safety standards that I understand is going to be included is a requirement that if an employee, tests positive, that other employees in the workplace are notified of that. And so I think that it's important to kind of distinguish between, communicating information that allows employees and employers and managers to make safe decisions about exposure and transmission, and doing so in a way that still maintains the employee's confidentiality, because that piece has not been changed at all. The EOC has made clear that there is no change with that piece of this. And I think, we run into a lot of issues, especially with smaller work sites and smaller employers, where, when you say somebody has a temperature and is being sent home, or someone's been tested positive, that everybody knows because there's only so many people and maybe there's only one person who's not there. But you still, as the employer, want to make sure you're not the one that is betraying the confidentiality of that information. I would also say that I think, I'm fine with temperature checks, but I think that there is a certain limit on how useful they are. And I would say some of kind of the self-screening questionnaires perhaps are a little bit more useful and just tend to have a little bit less risk in terms of, disclosing, unintentionally disclosing confidential information, or, just getting false information, frankly, that isn't really indicative of the risk of exposure or transmission or infection.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from the participants? Okay, if not, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Mitch.
We do have one more quick question, and that is how many companies are actually having an orientation right now for employees to address what the expectations are. We'd love to know the answer. That we don't have that set up as a poll question. I wish we did and could, but we can't quite make that work. But if you could just respond just maybe in the Q&A, and just let us know if you have companies, just yeses or nos, and let us know whether or not you're currently doing any sort of an orientation or training program for your employees when they're coming back into the office.
Yes, and then Keith had a quick question, which I think I can answer, but Kara might need you to back me up. So Virginia just announced business requirements that require employers to notify employees when a colleague tests positive for COVID. Does that override confidentiality requirements? I'm going to say no. I think we would handle that the same way that we're handling it today, or hopefully handling it today. So if you have an employee who tests positive for COVID, you certainly would want to let colleagues know that may have been around the specific colleague, but you would do so without mentioning this person by name. With smaller organizations, this can be a little bit more challenging, especially if there's only a few people in the office. It would be very easy to kind of narrow down who that individual might be, but we would never mention that person by name.
Yeah, and I would add to that during a pandemic is the only time that you can reveal that information. But as Cassie said, again, you don't want to say or even confirm that it is somebody. So if somebody says, "Oh, it was Cassie because she's not here today," you don't say, "Oh yeah, it was," right? You would simply say, "We have a colleague," and that's it. We move on from that topic.
I think that's right. And I would also say, I think a lot of companies have run into challenges with, being pressured by a customer or a partner or someone else that they're sharing a work site with on providing the specifics. And I think a kind of a go-to line, if you need it, is that, the EEOC has made clear that while, under the pandemic, we can share information regarding exposure and transmission and infection, we're still legally obligated to maintain the confidentiality of our employees' identities in this regard.
Great, thanks, ladies. And then I think, Mitch, we're ready for you now.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. A good topic, good presentations. I think one of the comments that stuck with me that I heard recently about this was we're all in this together. And if we work cooperatively and guide our decision-making by a spirit of cooperation, we'll all come out of this a lot better and adjust to what needs to be done that much better. So cooperation is the key. I want to thank our speakers, Kim, Cassie, and Kara. Good presentation. These are the kind of presentations that we hope we're able to continue to provide at SECAF. Sort of short subject bursts of information that hit timely topics and are to the point and can be disseminated quickly. As we said at the beginning, the material will be made available to you and you'll be given that to review via a separate link. We've got another event coming up on the 28th of July, which is the GovCon member virtual networking event from 5 to 6:30. If you go to the SECAF website, which is shown up in the top left, you'll be able to register for this event and also to see what else is going on with SECAF. So with that, I want to thank you for participating. Again, a big thank you to Helios, to our longtime colleague, Kathy Alvarado, for making the speakers available today. And of course, to Kara and Chassie and Kim, thank you for making the time and talking to us today. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.